Hello again. I'm intrigued by the sudden interest in Ukraine which people in Britain are showing. In the description to this video, I give a link to one of my pieces made almost a year ago in April 2021, in which I draw attention to the fact that there were at that time 1.5 million refugees from the war in eastern Ukraine. Nobody, though, wanted to talk about Ukraine or its refugees a year ago, so this video passed without notice. I was concerned about it a year ago, though, as you will see if you watch the video, and I mentioned that the British press was ignoring the war and refugee problem at that time. Let's look at the description to the video which was published on this channel on April the 9th, 2021. Yes. 1.5 million refugees have resulted from the war in Ukraine, but nobody wishes to talk about them or the war which has raged in Europe for 7 years. The British government has decided that an unlimited number of refugees from Ukraine should be allowed to settle in this country. Curiously enough, they are only expecting tens of thousands. This is eerily reminiscent of the time when Romania joined the European Union in 2007, and it was predicted that no more than a few thousand Romanians would wish to settle in Britain. Last year, there were 385,000 Romanians living in this country. Doubtless, something of the kind is about to happen again. Let's face it, if you're a Ukrainian who has made it to Moldova, would you want to stay in Moldova as a refugee? Or would you think that your prospects would be greatly enhanced if you came to Britain instead, especially if you could already speak a bit of English? I rest my case. The government are, by the way, preparing for 100,000 children coming here from Ukraine, many of whom will not speak English well, or indeed at all. Anybody foresee unsustainable pressure on schools in London? But wait a moment, I hear you say. There is a moral imperative at work here. We have a duty to accept countless thousands of refugees from Ukraine. As Thomas Macaulay, the 19th century politician and historian, remarked almost 200 years ago, we know no spectacle so ridiculous as the British public in one of its periodical fits of morality. We are, alas, seeing just such a ridiculous spectacle right now, and it is made all the more entertaining by the fact that those mouthing platitudes about our moral duty are in fact a bunch of awful racists. Why do I say this? It's easy enough. A month ago there had been no war in Ukraine. Nevertheless, there was a hideous refugee crisis. A month ago, Uganda was host to 1,400,000 refugees. Sudan had over 1 million refugees, and Ethiopia had about 800,000. Those 3 countries alone have more than 3 million refugees living in them, a terrible burden. This was the situation a month ago before the invasion of Ukraine. Tell me, did we at that time have a moral duty to take an unlimited number of refugees from those 3 African countries where the refugees impose a dreadful burden on their economies? Did anybody in Britain demanding that those 3 million refugees should be admitted to Britain without delay? No? Why was that? It's easy. Those refugees are black people, and the ones from Ukraine are white. It is simple racism. Those people calling upon the country to accept unlimited numbers of white refugees, but who were silent a month ago about all those millions of refugees in Uganda, Sudan and Ethiopia, are racists. I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, by the way, merely pointing it out. That is why I'm hugely amused by what Macaulay called the British public in one of its periodical fits of morality. It is sheer hypocrisy and a fine display of racism into the bargain. These people are so sanctimonious and pious, and yet openly display their preference for white people over black. I'm guessing that none of them have been calling for Britain to admit any of the Rohingya Muslims driven from Burma. There are 1 million of them. Still, let's assume that we should let some Ukrainians into the country. How many do people think would be a reasonable number? Remember, most of these people will want to live in London. They're not going to be evenly distributed across the entire nation, we all know that. Bear in mind all that talk about not wanting the NHS to be overwhelmed a year or two back. These people will all be entitled to register with a GP and to use the National Health Service as much as any of us without having paid a penny towards it. They cannot possibly all be housed in private homes. That's a completely loopy scheme. There's going to be a terrible housing crisis. So I am curious to know two things. I was expressing my concern and drawing attention to the plight of the Ukrainian refugees and the war in Donbass a year ago. I was wondering if any of the people who were describing me as uncaring about this problem had even noticed a year ago that for 7 years a war had been raging in Europe. Secondly, for those who do think that we should allow refugees into the country, what would be a realistic limit to set on the numbers? I ask this because, as I say, those who have gone to Moldova, Bulgaria and Hungary will not stay long in those countries if they think they can get into Britain. Does anybody think that we can accommodate 1 million refugees, for instance? Or even 2 or 3 million? What number do people think would be sensible?